Hello, story seekers. I'm Nico,
I'm Ben, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
and Nano season continues into its second week.
And just like last year, we are taking the challenge.
NaNoWRIMO challenges writers to pen 50,000 words in the month of November. No mean feat.
You can also increase that cap or even set a word count for editing.
In this Nano season, we will explore our works in progress and talk about what it takes to finish a damn novel.
Finishing the damn novel, which is, after last week, what you're looking down the barrel of.
Yeah, I'm in the edity bit.
So
Technical
you've
term.
so how many fresh words have you done on the book in order to finish that first draft?
So I did another 13,000.
So you were talking about 80 or so thousand words
So
first
that
draft.
got it to 76.
Cool.
And then in this edit, it's gone up by about 5 now.
So first things first, you have to absolutely take that moment of you've completed a first draft of a novel. Doesn't matter how shit it is, if it even is shit. You've done a first draft of a novel.
I'm
Which
calling it draft 0 because it feels like that's where it is. It's got an A, it's got a B, it's got an arrow that goes between the two, but I'm not happy to go right. Do you want to look at this for me? It's 2 yet, so it's not quite a
no,
draft
but
one, I
I
think.
felt I felt like that as well with my first one. But
Yeah,
the story's told, maybe not told well, maybe not told as well as you want to do, and you've got loads of ideas about how you're going to improve it or beef it up, etc. But you've completed a first draft, which is a win. So you've got to take it. You've got to. You've just because otherwise, it's so difficult to muster yourself for the editing process.
yeah. I definitely was buoyed by it.
Good.
I had a moment where I, on your advice, actually went through and I numbered all the chapters, and I looked at it and I
Yeah.
was like, okay, and now it's like a checklist. And I don't have to go chapter 1, chapter 2. I can pick a chapter, just pick a number, roll a dice, whatever I want to do, and just work on that chapter. And that's really freeing, actually. Just, I'm going to get this piece of writing and make it the best I can make it in this moment.
Mm.
And that's kind of cool.
I think it's a very cool process. I love it. I really like writing. I think we had a chat off mic that and I mentioned that when I'm at least initially when I'm writing, I have to sort of partially deliberately turn off that critical bit of my brain just so I
Yeah.
can push the words out and get something down. So I actually quite delight in turning it back on and being able to sort of go through it with a fine tooth comb because all you have to do is read it after when you've got that mindset on,
Yeah.
and you will naturally make changes because it's not good enough yet.
That's exactly what I've been doing. And
Yeah,
it's what a really interesting part of the mindset. And I think this is the best advice I could give anyone who's doing it is do not read it like it's a published book. They're just the words that you got out while you were pushing the story out of your brain.
really,
And
you would give that advice?
I would, because if otherwise everything you look at, you're going to go, oh, that's so redundant, or why did I write that, or that bit's terrible. If
Yeah,
you're trying to look at it like it's the finished piece.
but that's where the editing comes in. That's how, for at least for my mind, it sounds like we might be working differently here, but for my mind, like it's that like, oh God, that's horrid. That oh no, that sentence got to change. No, that's coming out. That's moving somewhere else, etc.
I
That is
know I think we're on the same path, but
right.
I'm coming at it from a rather than going, oh God, that's bad, I should rewrite that bit. Don't look at it and say, oh my God, I can't write, because
Oh
you're
God, no,
you're
no, no.
seeing things and going, oh, that would never be in a book. But that's the point.
Okay,
that's
well, I
that's
think
where you should be.
anyone that's being hit by that just needs to have it reiterated to them that the first draft of everything is shit.
Yeah.
So it it is such it's a truism of the process that we're talking about, but people do need to be reminded of it. I've needed to be reminded of it. You've needed to be reminded of it. The first draft of everything is shit, and that's okay because at least it's a step in the right direction.
And there'll be
But
good bits.
yeah, yeah, sure. And occasionally you'll read a sentence and be like, "Fuck, that came out good." Um, but I think you've still got to be like the point of the editing process is to be critical.
Yeah.
But if you're critical if your level of critical goes up to like self-mutilation, saying that you can't write and stuff like that, then yeah, you need to walk it back for sure.
I think, yeah, I think what I'm saying is attack the piece, not yourself.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
way of putting it.
it's especially when my favorite thing that's happened so far. So I'm gonna pick a chapter at random, and I got halfway through the chapter, and I went, "What the fuck am I talking about?" And I scrolled a bit more and realised that somehow, in what would be chapter 17, the entirety of chapter 12 would just in there, but it was the same characters. So I didn't. I was like, "How this? Why have they said?
Oh
What is
no,
going on?" And then I
yeah,
had to
that is
sort
a
of
mess.
extricate a chapter and shove it for earlier in the book. Right. Huh. That's interesting.
Bloody hell. Yep. No, I think I haven't. I didn't have that happen to me, but I did have a few. I did have a few moments where someone would say something to a character. I was like, I'm pretty sure that character's dead.
It
In
also had
mine.
things where, because, I wrote it, most of it quite chronologically, there were bits that I'd set up as one character, and then later on, I'd obviously half remembered the idea, and someone else had done it. So I thought, oh, better change that name there.
Mm. Oh
Because,
yeah. My my draft is still full of like different names for things that are the same thing.
yeah.
So like I've renamed geographical features, people, and then it hasn't seen like a unified edit yet. And I think it's one of the things that I just need to do and get it out of the way in order to get a sort of homogenization across the board. Because otherwise, I'm going to leave myself a massive task of unpicking what madness I've created.
Oh,
Uh,
I had my first proper Control F replace as well.
oh, good.
It was based on a bit of feedback from you last episode when you were talking about, don't let the names be too close to other things.
Yeah.
I had a character, and as soon as I say it, you're going to go, "Oh, come on!" But I'd been making the names for humans by combining Latin words that gave meaning of what they are,
Hmm.
and I'd ended up with this guy called the High Lord Commander Percival Vincare, and then I looked back and I went, "That's really close to Vindicare from
Oh,
Discworld," and I have to change that because there's only two letters in it. And as soon as I saw it with that in mind, I thought, no, that's too similar to a high-ranking human with political power
yeah,
in a series
potentially.
that I write a lot like.
I don't know whether that one didn't sound too much like it for me. I think just because like like vindication and stuff
Vincari,
like it's a
yeah.
very different word. Um,
But
but
yeah, I don't know. It gave me veterinary vibes, and I don't know
well,
why.
if you're not happy with it, then you've got to change it, which
Yeah.
is a good thing. So that's well done. I know there was something that I remember reading that Robin Hobb does when she's writing, and she's just a, a beautifully elegant writer. Like her story construction, her characterization, etc. Everything is beautiful, and she has a really sort of pragmatic encyclopedia on the go of her world building
Oh, that's cool.
that she updates as she's writing. And even then, she'll occasionally get a problem where someone is somewhere where they couldn't possibly be. I think
Yeah.
she's in one of the articles I read about it. Her editor caught it, and it was like the one that happened to me, where it was like that person can't be there. That person's dead. They died 2 books ago.
Oh, wow.
And just the encyclopedia entry, that she was just a Word document, I assume, but it just hadn't been updated or an Excel folder. Um,
You have to get famous enough, like Robin, that there's probably a wiki of your books, so you
I
can
bet,
check your own
yeah,
wiki.
I suspect there probably is a wiki for the Realm of the Elderling stuff. Anyway, that's all. That's all by the by.
It
Last week
is.
we had an interesting approach to this Nano season, which is that Nico gave me his a first draft of his, like a section around 1,500 words long. That was a first draft. It comes straight out of the tip of his pen or other things, I guess. Um, and I read it out. It was a deeply weird experience because we'd never read each other's stuff out before on the podcast, especially not a first draft,
Yeah.
because that is absolutely brutal to go through that process. And I didn't I sort of I didn't take the gloves off, but like I definitely gave you some pretty stern feedback.
Yeah. I was thrashed
Yeah,
soundly.
but it's it's got you've bounced back from that process really, really well because it is a very emotionally draining process. I think editing and receiving feedback.
Yeah, it's like
Um,
someone telling you your baby's ugly, isn't it? But you got to suck it up. You got to raise that kid.
yeah. Well, fortunately, you can change this. uh, as can I. So we're going to do something very similar this time. Nico has a piece that I've given him. It's a little bit longer, not too much longer, but it's a little bit longer. Um, but it's not a first draft because I don't have anything from the novel that's a first draft. I think that's probably a third draft. What you're about to read out.
Okay. I was
Um,
going to ask.
yes, so third draft. I would say it is mostly done from my
Mhm.
standpoint, which I'd be interested to see where we end up because after Nico reads it, he's going to give me some feedback and we're going to talk it through and we're going to see how we get on. But I feel very hesitant to hand the reins over to you because it's such a weird process. I've never heard my own working read out like this before.
It's interesting to see you on the back foot. It's new.
Mm. Why do people delight in seeing me on the back foot?
I'm not delighting in it. I'm intrigued.
All right, come on then. Let's have it.
Right. Culverne City. The Tor's stables were enormous. They housed hundreds of horses, along with their tack, whilst also being home to stable boys and adult grooms. The place smelled strongly of horse manure and leather, refreshingly pleasant odours after the rookery. The horsemaster of the Tor presided over it all, and it was with her that Shillingstock negotiated for the loan of a gelding. Had he been alone, perhaps the negotiation would have taken some time, but the woman became agitated when she saw how poorly her many animals reacted to the presence of his ravens. He saw that she feared they would begin to thrash and kick at their stalls, and so quickly agreed to the loan if he would command the ravens to wait outside. Shillingstock smiled to himself as he issued the command, looking up into the horrendous features of his ravens. The things did not nod or speak in reply. Instead, they simply turned and left to stand in the sun of the stable's yard. The horse's coat, he saw it when it was brought to him, was a soft brown, and he had a pale mane. Shillingstock could sense that he had an easy-going nature as the gelding almost immediately took to him, nudging his hand affectionately. His choice of a gelding over a stallion or a mare was one of practicality. Only geldings could stand to be in close proximity to ravens for extended periods of time. After watching the grooms fit him with tack and a saddle, Shillingstock led the gelding out of the stable. The beast checked slightly upon approaching his ravens. They were stood where he had sent them, staring vacantly in his direction. Shillingstock pulled himself up into the saddle. He smiled again to see the panicked frowns of the mages who passed them by, hurrying to get away from his ravens. What was the point of taking all the institutionalized abuse aimed at finder mages if you couldn't instill at least a little fear and awe into other mages? From atop his gelding, Shillingstock saw that the walls of the Tor stood out starkly in every direction against the horizon, which was streaked with thin clouds. The imposing stone of their construction was dark and veined with electrum in the same manner as the Tor itself. Unlike the thick castle walls the nobles of Baran favoured, the Tor's walls were thin, only a yard wide. Those walls encircled the centre of the plateau on which the Tor was built and had near invisible gates that were essentially tall doors made of the same stone. The gatekeepers, their black robes trimmed with cloth of gold, were empowered to use their casts to close and open the gates, even to defend them with their casts should an attack occur, though none had in living memory. It was often a role for younger or less naturally powerful mages, or those seeking to understand that liminal space between the bubble of the Tor and the outside world. One such gatekeeper mage nodded at Shillingstock and stepped to bar his path. "Halt, finder! Tell me your business beyond our walls." Her name was Tevan. They had been foundlings together, but both understood the formality required of them in that moment. Mages were not permitted beyond the walls without a good reason, and each time the gate was opened would cost her something, either from her own power reserves, or that stored in the electrum rod all gatekeepers were issued with. By order of the Undermaster, I am tasked with an investigation in Chayot Forest. Shillingstock kept his voice even, trying not to smile at Tevan, despite a roguish impulse to flirt at the improper moment. The two of them had spent some time together as youngsters, before he had found Seron, and they had parted amicably when no connection had grown, beyond the physical, between them. Pass then, with luck for your find. Her duty discharged, she gave Shillingstock a genuinely warm smile, which lightened his heart for a moment. She then turned slightly and held out her hand towards the doors, as her power dyed her eyes a deep orange. The stone doors, wide enough for two carts to pass through without touching the other's wheels, split in the centre and pulled apart silently. Tevan's eyes returned to their usual topaz colouring, and she nodded a final time to Shillingstock. Shillingstock urged his gelding past her and through the walls of the tor. His ravens lumbered along behind him. Beyond was a vista that he treasured each time he was allowed outside of the walls. The city of Culverne spread out around him. The ground upon which the city had been founded was a complex mixture of tall, flat-topped, ochre-tinged mesas and the canyons between them. Webbing those canyons were densely populated thoroughfare bridges, which were thronged by the masses and the business of everyday life. Merchants of every type mixed with people from all over the continent of Barrand to make their homes and livings from the ripples of wealth which emanated from the tor. Shillingstock knew too that people lived all the way down below the bridges, in the shadowy nadirs, where the sun was visible for a mere few hours a day. What they could possibly gain from such a life choice was a mystery to him. The tallest mesa was, of course, home to the tor. That tower stretched up a further 300 feet to impose its might upon the sky. The other 5 lesser mesas were home to the cog-turner shafts. The masonry-lined lips of those shafts were distinct from the long, flat-roofed turner sheds, which stuck out from them like ugly spokes on a carter's wheel. Shillingstock had once read that the shafts had originally been electrum mines, repurposed when the potential of the cog-turners had been discovered 70 years ago. Since then, the population of Culverne had swollen dramatically, with those cog-turners living in the very mine shafts the electrum they charged was pulled from. Huge, copper-clad pipes climbed up out of those humongous turner sheds and turned to streak towards the tor. Along the way, thin offshoots plunged down to the upper reaches of the bridges. The demands of industry had become such in recent years that the tor mages had given dispensation for some of the power to be siphoned off and put to work. Carved into the cliff walls below and by the bridges, Shillingstock knew there were workshops where this power was being used in intriguing ways to automate processes. He longed to see their tinkering, and promised himself a visit to them on his return before being sealed back within the tor's walls. The Undermaster had claimed, during their wine-fueled conversation the previous night, that the people of Culverne had an absurdly high standard of living compared to the feudal serfs who still tilled fields in some areas of the continent where the nobles clung on to the old ways. Shillingstock had inquired if the old man had ever travelled as far as Gothrang, the old seat of kings. He had heard that the place, long bereft of a stable population, had fallen entirely back towards the dark age of barbarism. The old man had nodded knowingly, and spoke at length of the warrior tribalism that humanity was capable of, if left unguided by educated minds. Shillingstock, with the gate closing silently behind him, found himself on the first sloping stone bridge which descended towards the chasm between the mesas. The bridge was made up of wide and long-tiered steps, and he knew that the underside of it arched like a viaduct in order to span the distance. He descended at the pace his gelding was willing to trot, allowing the beast to feel comfortable with his weight and control of the reins. Although not a frequent rider, Shillingstock liked to think of himself as naturally gifted with the beasts. Sauron had scoffed at him once for his arrogance on the subject. The two had been sharing a pilfered bottle of cold white wine, whilst nestled between unfrequented stacks in the Tor's library. Shillingstock felt the memory like a punch to the throat, and coughed, causing the gelding to prick back its ears momentarily. He reached forwards and apologetically stroked its neck to soothe the animal. Upon reaching the other side of the bridge, he directed the horse down a descending switchback path, which zigged and zagged towards the first of the upper bridges. The shod hooves of his horse on the cobbled path provided a steady beat in his ears as the noise of the city grew louder and louder. The path soon spat him out into a corner of the market bridge, where he could smell roasting meat and see 100 or more brightly coloured stalls set out in front of modest townhouses. The fenced gardens of those townhouses stretched towards the edge of the bridge, and often featured viewing patios for those merchants who could afford to live there. Such places, thought Shillingstock, could only be used to contemplate the dizzying drop they slept above. Shillingstock, despite his stomach's clamour for some food, nudged the gelding to take a cliff path that wrapped around the mesa. As he took that cobbled road, he rode past the many front doors of houses that had been carved into the rock face. Those troglodyte abodes were what the majority of the free citizenry of Culvern resided in. Upon the other side of the road was the empty air. Shillingstock had heard tales of lads after a strong night out in the upper bridges, simply stumbling drunkenly once and pitching head over heel into the abyss. The tales often ended darkly, with the people who reside in the shadowy canyons at the base of the mesa gratefully receiving the free meat and refusing to return the body for burial. The people upon the road parted willingly to stay out of Shillingstock's way. Some even stepped closer to the edge to let him pass. Many of them bowed their heads in deference, and still more looked horrified at the sight of the ravens that flanked him. He held his back straight and rode on with a feigned indifference to their awareness. His path took him around the next mesa and down across a bridge to a lower one. Ever downwards he guided the gelding, navigating through the increasingly chaotic roads that marked a distinct downturn in affluence. On several occasions, some of the smaller bridges which had been in place during his last foray beyond the walls of the Tor were missing. Likely, he thought, the materials had been reallocated to a place better suited for the survival of the people that depended on the bridge for trade. Shillingstock had heard that the bridges were often owned by groups of people, which sometimes led, inevitably, to conflict between bridge owner groups. He shuddered to think of what it must be like to live in such a precarious arrangement without the security of the Tor to rely on. After several hours of navigating down through Culvern, all the while endeavouring to head west towards Chayot Forest, he found himself finally beyond the monolithic mesas and at ground level. The outskirts of the city, marked with the mercantilism and industry of Culvern, began to relent and give way to the natural world which surrounded it. The majority of the trade there was involved in the lumber and hunting industries. The workers would make the short trek across the dead scree-land of the foothills by Culvern to the verdant Chayot Forest in the west for furs, meat, and timber. Finally, caving to his belly's demands, Shillingstock purchased a game pie from a merchant's cart by waving a Tor-stamped coin at the man, who scurried over to hand it up to him. The dense crust gave way willingly to the jellied meat interior as Shillingstock demolished the pie. Once he was done, he sucked in a deep breath of the dry air blowing from the south. His belly grumbled its appreciation, and he felt his mind finally shake clear of his hangover. Shillingstock studied the strangeness of the edge of the city for a moment. He was sat at the point where the cobbled roads of Culvern transformed to rutted cart tracks, which snaked out in many directions, even into the south, towards the desert. He took the western road that ran over the hard, small hills, which bubbled up around the mesas, and nudged the gelding up to a canter. The heavy thud of the raven's clawed feet drummed behind him as their pace quickened to match. Ahead, the dense weight of the Chayot tree line approached. Massive trees reared up as their upper branches sought to rival the nearby tall mesas of Culverne. Shillingstock plunged along the road, and within an hour was into the heavy shade of the forest.
Well, that was a weird experience.
Was it?
Yes, very weird. Just
Why
hear it.
so?
Well, because hearing somebody else read my writing, it's fascinating. Um,
Is that you telling me you're going to record your own audiobook, Ben? You've got the practice.
yeah. No, I liked it a lot. I mean, interesting and sort of like strange in an uncomfortable way,
Yeah.
but not necessarily a bad way. Um, Fascinating. Can you see why I chose this particular bit to go through this process?
Yes, actually, I can. There's a few things. Like, I mean, first of all, it paints a lovely word picture, for lack of a better phrase. But there's a lot of not even world building, town building
Yeah,
in this piece, and it's such a difficult thing to do because it's
yeah.
you're having to toe the line between here is an exposition dump and I promise you this is a nice story, and you are doing it very well here. There's
Good to hear.
there's a lot of information to pass, but there are some great moments in there, catching things from a Shillingstock's perspective and his inferences rather than it just being this is a thing, this is what it does. It's through his lens, and it means that you get to learn the world in a way that's more sympathetic to the character rather than just uh, these. Look at the flags of those major houses and tell me what they mean. What are their house words?
Mm.
Um, there's some. I mean, one of the first ones I wanted to talk about with it. There's one word in it that stood out and made me go, "Oh!" when I read it the first time, and it was demolished.
Demolished.
So when you're talking about the game pie at the end, you say he demolished the pie,
Mm.
and I know that demolition is a thing we've had for a while, but in the setting it feels really modern.
Okay.
Maybe that's just how I see that word, but it jumped out a lot. It's very aggressive and it's quite modern, and it was I know exactly what you're trying to say with how he ate it, so it is doing the right job, but it did stick out for me.
Fascinating. So you'd see demolished as a like a modern word.
It feels very contemporary.
Hmm.
That's what I'm looking for.
That's fascinating. Because it's obviously it's a Latin root word.
Yeah,
So it's
we've been knocking down buildings forever,
yeah, yeah.
as
So
long as we've
interesting,
had buildings.
but like maybe in that sort of like
It's possibly even
humorous
yeah.
use of it to do with food. It's maybe that's a bit more modern. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
I
can
think
see
that's
that. Yeah,
like the colloquial
yeah.
because it is a colloquial version of demolish, isn't it? Oh, actually demolish that when you've eaten
Mhm.
a meal. Maybe that's what it would, because especially being from East London, I got pictures of people pushing away an empty plate with some liquor left on it, going, "Oh, demolish that, babe." But
Yeah, no. I think it's a good note. It's a good note.
um,
Um, just before we carry on,
go
so
on.
not only is it world building and town building, as you were saying, but it's also a moment of travel,
Yes.
which is also something that's quite difficult to do in, I think, in particular in fantasy worlds where you're having to sort of build the road that they're walking on as they're walking on it.
Yeah, I think
Especially this early in the book. This is from chapter 2. This is a
okay.
section. It's sort of towards the start of chapter 2.
It's a funny one as well because it's really hard to get that time perspective in. And you do say in there after a couple of hours he made it through the town, and that does give you a better idea. Well, he's on a horse and he's making decent pace, so it's a big place. It must be huge, but he's going back and forth in himself, so it's not that big, and so you can start to put things together. But that idea of scale and how long have people been doing things, that is something that's really hard to capture,
Mm.
especially because if you say, "Oh, we're in New York, we've got to get to Chicago," you can go on Google and find out how far that is. If you say he's leaving the tour and he's going to Chad Forest, we don't know how far that is. So
No,
yeah, you do have to spend words on that and make that interesting, which you have done a good job of here.
glad to hear it. It's so the other thing for me, which was interesting in the to hear it read out, was
Yeah.
that I feel like the stuff in the stables is newer than the stuff later on in that section.
Okay.
Um, so that's seen less pen, the stuff in the stable, I would say.
Yeah.
Uh, so it was interesting to sort of. It felt like it did pick up pace a little bit when he gets out from beyond the walls, but maybe that works because he's beginning his journey. He's a bit excited. He's engaging with the world because
Yeah.
he's living quite a sheltered life.
Also, I wonder how much of that is your game master instinct. Because you when you're telling stories, you're used to sort of skipping over the travel a bit,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
interactions in stables and in taverns. Those, you've been there. You say, well, we'll do a quick scene in the tavern, and that'll be part one, and then we'll start the story, and then somehow we spend 3 hours in the tavern.
Yeah,
And it just depends where you can pull story threads from. So I think giving yourself the time to sit back in that travel a little bit and give a couple of thousand words to just moving through a town, especially where there is nothing specifically happening in that town. Because it's easy to say, he pushed into the marketplace and someone stepped out and said, "Aha, you're here," and pointed a sword at him, and then he did a backflip or whatever. That's all easy to do. But having someone move through a place because geographically it's in the way of the next place he needs to be, that is harder to do.
yeah, yeah. And but sort of necessary when you're building world and stuff.
Yeah,
So
if you want to give scope and scale, you need
mhm.
to do it.
Because yeah, I could have given you a fight scene. I could have given you, like a more sort of. I'm going to use the word exciting, like more exciting scene, and by that I mean action filled. I feel
Yeah.
like there is still excitement in world building because I think little snippets, and
But
it'll catch different people in different ways. Like someone might have found the denizens of the underbridge.
I was just about to say the smoking denizens of the underbridge,
Yeah,
Chekhov's denizens of the underbridge, like
yeah,
when are
yeah.
they coming back? Terrifying. Oh yeah, sometimes dudes fall off. That's terrible. Yeah, and the people at the bottom eat them. What? That's
Well,
how dare you?
so that kind of stuff is throughout the book because it's not a fantasy book in my head.
Yeah.
It is what I'm terming. I think it probably already is a thing. Magic punk,
Mm.
which means that well, so typically, so if you have like cyberpunk or biopunk, it's normally the thing that fuels the society, and it's magic fuels this society, and then you have this massive uh, yawning gaps between elements of society, like the people on top, the people
Yeah.
on bottom.
The haves and have nots, but the haves
Exactly.
is unlimited magical power, which is so much scarier than cash.
Well, yeah, it's definitely on par, if not more. And but then you also have this inbuilt like, oh shit's going to kick off. There's going to be a rebellion of some sort. That's always a
Yeah.
part of any kind of like cyber bio or in this case magic punk.
And I mean, you're saying it's not a fantasy book, but those people definitely become ghouls, don't they? Little green ghouls, little.
Oh, that would be telling, wouldn't it? So it's for
The
me. For me, it's there are no other sentient. Well, that's not true actually. Hmm.
Stop spoiling your book, Ben.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
you want to find out what there are no more sentient of, then you're gonna need to buy this when it comes out, gang.
So I was going to pose you a question.
He is.
Actually, no, no. Actually, I'll do this first. Your voice for Shillingstock. He's one of my main characters.
Yeah.
You made him quite old in
I
a way.
didn't mean to.
Interesting. Just no, but just obviously because nobody listening got context for that piece before you read it. I didn't
Yeah.
give you any context for that piece before you read it.
I think I think I saw him at like 35.
Right. Yeah. I
Just
think I
the
think
air of confidence on him.
he's yes, but I can sort of see that. I think that is an interesting take on it because that might mean that I need to tweak it. What I'm trying to get with him is like it's like false confidence
Okay.
because of his position in life. He's had this leg up. He's lived inside an almost quite literal bubble,
Yeah.
um, where he's been fed this line where he's the be all and end all, but also like stepped on by other
Mm.
people. So he knows what it's like to be stepped on, and the moment that he gets out of that scenario, he
I
starts mentally stepping on the people that aren't mages.
I don't think it's a problem where you are now because false confidence has to appear as confidence
Yeah.
until it's discovered as false.
Yes.
So from a small part of what you've said is the second chapter, I
Hmm.
think for him to, as a reader, come off as confident, we need to see that be pulled out from under him. We have to see him falter in a way that makes us go, "Oh no, he's bullshitting. He's not equipped for this." Because
Well,
that's, and I'm sure we're not spoiling your book, Ben.
no, but I think anyone that's listened to any of the stories that I've written for this podcast at any point knows that I don't treat my characters particularly well. So I think it's pretty clear that something bad will happen.
I do have a note, which is it's a really difficult one, but there are three words that get a lot of use
Sure.
in that piece. One of them I don't think you can help, which is ravens, because I think that's actually a name for a thing. They're not birds, clearly. They're
Yeah.
monstrous in some way. So it's quite hard to call them anything else. Mesas is another one, but again, it's a geographical landmark, so it's quite hard to say anything else.
Yeah.
And the third is gelding. You do say horse one of the times, but the word get, especially at the beginning, gelding happens a lot.
Yeah.
And you can say things like his steed, his mount, just to switch that out a bit. It felt less like that when I read it out loud, but reading it on the page,
Okay.
probably because it's quicker, it felt like gelding and ravens were happening loads in the
Yeah.
beginning.
No, it's a good
But
note. It's a good note.
it's I'm having to really, really pick at it to find anything that made me sort of, nothing made me recoil in horror.
What else you got?
Uh, Not a lot really. Um, I think I needed more context because a lot of it is this is definitely a thing between things.
Yes, very much so.
So it was quite hard to draw, much like the scene I gave you that was all, oh, this is clearly setting up stuff for much later. This was creating part of the world. It's definitely made me more interested to learn a lot about Electrum and how they do it, which is actually a note I gave you before because you've introduced this element
Mm.
and talked about what it does. And the more I hear about it and how they're using it, and especially in this, them talking about using it for mechanized industry, which obviously fits into your fantasy punk or magic punk. I'm not sure what you said. Sorry,
Magic Punk, yeah.
magic
I
punk,
think Fantasy Punk typically uses like orcs
Reagan's.
and goblins and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
but the magic punk elements of it was nice to see a little flash of that. And there are lots of little things, them talking about moving bits of the towns from like taking them away from the poor people to better defend the wealthy, and this implication that to him, if you're a merchant, the only reason to have a balcony would be to think about throwing yourself off it. So there's a hell of a lot of nice kind of inference and setup here, but it's very clear that this is part of a grander story because on its own, I feel a little bit blueballed.
Yeah. No, I think
But,
that's
but I
totally reasonable.
should, I should, because this is the bit that's meant to be kind of riling me up and getting me in.
In for whatever happens inside the forest.
Yes,
Yeah.
I also think that, and it may just be because of the differing style in how we write. You don't have to be as plain in your language with some of the stuff you're saying. Like you talk about the doors in the giant wall and these almost invisible doors, and they're a fantastical thing. This incredible magically opening and closing aperture, and you describe it as essentially a large door, which is it
Yeah.
just pulls that magic away from it, and I don't that that may be completely on purpose.
Well, partially, yeah. It's an interesting note that that was that's a part of that sort of stable section. So that's seen less pen, as I was saying. Um, but I think he doesn't necessarily respect it too much.
Yeah,
He's more focused on the cost. He, despite his like natural inclinations, he does do the formal thing with this gatekeeper
yeah,
because as I think we know from the world building that we've had from the last NaNoWRIMO, that in my setting, people drawing on their own power reservoir will mean that they lose something. Like
Yeah.
it's it's sort of like a semi-finite resource, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So that's the bit that he's focused on, the interpersonal bit, and what the necessary role that someone that an old friend of his plays in his this sort of quest that he's been set out on, this task that he's been given. But I think it's an interesting note. I possibly could be a bit more grandiose in the way that I describe this, but it's almost a very strange thing as well, because
Yeah.
it's such a thin wall
Yes.
that the assumption is that my hope is that the assumption is that obviously it's a magic wall, so
Yeah.
it's gonna fuck people up.
I definitely got that.
Yeah.
I think the difficult thing to balance here is because it's like perspective 0.5, isn't it? It's through his lens, but not in his head. This scene.
Yes.
So, and it means he is not blown away by the incredible magic of these gates, but your reader should be given permission to be. And
Yeah.
I think if you understate too hard, because he has seen it, the stakes won't feel high enough. If, for example, something's going to try and smash those gates later,
Mm-hmm.
and they come down, you go, well, it was just essentially a big door.
Yeah, true. Yeah, no, no. I think that's also a good note. I'm glad that that's been picked up on, because I don't think that's necessarily something that I would have seen necessarily. So very useful, very useful.
I mean, this is all part of why you get people who write differently to you to read your stuff, isn't it? Because we always get this in our episodes where you say, "Oh, did you mean to do that?" And I'll go, "No." Oh, yeah, that would have been really smart. And it's because you're looking at stories and storytelling in one way, and I'm looking at it in another way, and it does mean that you get those moments of, because Shilling Stock inside and out, and this world, that those things aren't new to you, especially anymore, because this book has been sort of gestating in you and then on your page for a little while now.
Yeah, too long.
But
Too long.
don't be mean to yourself.
No, but it has been a very long process.
Yeah.
And you get, you do that first pass, that first draft edit sort of thing, and then you sort of keep working on it a little bit, and bits of the book are in different places. Some of them are far closer to that first draft, and some of them are closest to being final drafts.
Yeah.
This was like in the middle piece, I would say,
Yes.
somewhere in the middle. It was literally in the middle of a chapter, and it's a transitional piece. So what I was attempting to do here was bear what I feel is like this sort of like downtick in action moment from this bit of the book, a necessary downtick in order to build up.
So you need to breathe in so that you can breathe out.
Exactly, yeah. Because with the intention of it needing to be savaged in order to, because if we can bring those moments up, then that means that the moments that they build up to are going to be spectacular,
even more upper than what they was.
Exactly. Yeah,
But
there's probably a technical term for that, which I'm not aware of, but
I wouldn't be. But no, I did definitely enjoy it, and it's doing a very good job of making me want to know more about a bunch of stuff in it.
Great.
Like, I want to know more about the Ravens, because I at the moment I'm seeing them as like 6 foot tall birds with horrible faces, which I know they can't be, but when it's talking about like this scaled feet, I was like, yeah, that's a bird, man. That's just a big ass bird.
Have I really not read anything
clawed
out on
feet.
here? Have I really not read anything out on here that does the description of the Ravens before?
I don't think so.
Oh man, that was such a cruel thing to do to our audience. I'm so sorry.
You may have done, maybe I forgot, but I was like, "This is big ass birds, and they scare the horses."
I'll send you a description afterwards.
Gutted audience, you don't get the description.
No, that was really good. It was good to go through that process, and for myself, and just in terms of NaNoWRIMO,
yeah,
very spotty this year. Very spotty. Like,
Yeah.
um, I think I've done 3 big days on it.
Yeah.
At the time of recording, listeners, it's the 10th of November. So technically, having missed 7 days of a month-long thing, and then sort of trying to do like big swathes of edits to try and catch it up. Um, I've been starting a job, etc. Life stuff, but it's been odd because last year I was extremely committed. I had
Yeah.
quite a lot of extra time in order to do it, and I was pretty prolifically going at it every day. I think I missed one day last year,
Yeah.
and obviously completed it as we both won Nano last year. But this has been very different. But what it has been very good at is focusing in my edits onto stuff like this, as you've seen where my head's at with like what I'm looking at in terms of story construction.
Yes.
It is useful, but it is definitely not how NaNoWRIMO is intended to be used. Um, and so I feel a bit like I'm in uncharted waters to a certain degree, and I'm kind of using it and also our performances on the podcast as rails in which to steam down.
It's it's definitely been more fits and bursts this year
Mm,
because it's we're 10 days in, and I wrote some token words on the first day, missed a couple, wrote a bit more, then had a bit of a panic about where I was with it,
hmm
and now I'm wrote a bit more, and now I'm editing it a bit, and so even having that moment of I need to take a little break, and then hitting that guilt of you shouldn't take a break because you're doing NaNoWRIMO, but that is not how I should be approaching this. And I think
No,
coming to terms with that is a big thing. And I think in a way it's both very good for us and very bad for us that neither of us are as hard on it as we were last year,
yeah,
because we're not s- sort of gently goading each other into just pumping words out. Now we're both on this. Okay, let's turn this into not crap, and it's a
yeah,
lot harder to go on, really edit the crap out of that paragraph. It's like it's hard to do a sprint of that.
very much so. But
Yeah,
in terms of for the podcast and where we're at with it, sorry, where I'm at with it. Um, One of the things that I'm sort of reaffirming myself with is that I fully intend to continue what I've been doing and get a final draft of this and begin trying to get it published somewhere. And
yeah,
I'm fascinated to go through that process because I've heard, we've heard repeatedly from every guest we've had on pretty much how heartbreaking and sort of tumultuous that process is. Um, so it's interesting that we've done these 2 nanos. People have heard little bits from this book, and we've been talking about this thing that I've been writing because at some point they're also going to hear about me getting absolutely battered, but with rejections. So um, I'm seeing this as part of the journey that we're all taking together, and yeah, it's very exciting to me. It feels like a really fresh way to write a book, and I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it a lot, a lot, a lot.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. That's something.
Yeah, but it's hard, I would say,
Yes.
just because it's so. We were saying like the first draft of everything is shit, but what do you do when your third draft of something shit? Like you just sort of you start getting to a point where your teeth are a bit gritted, and you're just like, this is not fucking working. Um, which is sort of where I was at with the what I would probably term as like the first third of the bit that you wrote out.
Yeah.
It felt clunky. It felt like I was like being a bit uncoordinated with my word use. And then I feel like it kind of, as I said earlier, like starts kicking a little bit when you get into the description of the city and he's actually sort of riding his horse through the city and stuff. But even then, maybe it's got some ways to go. But that was fun. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for reading it out, taking the time
Thank you
to
for giving
learn
me
it.
the opportunity, man.
Good pronunciations and stuff as well. I enjoyed all that.
You gave me a little list so I didn't
Yes,
knob up your people and places.
that's right. A courtesy you did not extend to me.
You can't say crud.
Crude.
Oh no, don't do that. Ah, yes, Prague and Scarb.
Bath.
Ugh. Right,
Lovely.
so
Right.
all of
Shall we?
you out
Yeah.
there,
Yeah.
get on the Twitter and tell Ben his stuff's good because he doesn't believe me when I
No.
say it.
Say,
No,
I tell you what, if you've got any feedback, actually give it to me. I'd fucking love that. That would be amazing. If people were listening and were actually had a note, I'd hear that note.
hey Elon, make like 1 million accounts on your thing and
Oh no, it's an
come
absolute
at
mess
him.
at the moment. Absolute mess.
Maybe don't do it on Twitter. Come see us on Facebook or drop us an email.
Yeah,
But we would love, and honestly, any feedback on this piece or the piece from last week. Just drop us an email or a little message and say hello because it's nice to chat to you all.
definitely. And I think we'll wrap it there. Thank
Right,
you.
come on then. We've got words to write.
Yeah, but thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that. And next week we'll be back for some more NaNoWRIMO. See at what stage in the hair pulling process we're at next week.
Crying sounds terrible on mic, man. This is gonna suck.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're gonna miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year.
How do you come up with that shit, man?